The dust had barely begun to settle after Turkiye's deadliest earthquakes in modern history, when the earth started trembling again exactly 2 weeks later. For survivors of the first series of quakes, the second round of tremors set off another cycle of fear.
Aynı korku, aynı tedirgin, içeriye giremiyoruz. İçeriye giriyoruz, içeride duramıyoruz. Bilmiyoruz, biz de bilmiyoruz. Ne yapacağımızı bilmiyoruz. Allah bize merhamet etsin Rabbim.
Doctors working in the quake-stricken zone say that the nature of injuries has changed from physical wounds to psychological problems.
We have a lot of work to do in the coming days, months, and even years, because we know that psychological effects of earthquakes linger in the long term.
So, what steps can one take towards healing from devastating natural disasters? Let's first look at how trauma occurs after stressful, frightening, or distressing events. Research suggests natural disasters often lead to a high incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder among victims.
After the 1999 earthquakes, we conducted studies in the earthquake region, and with over 1,000 to 2,300 people, we found that those effects do not resolve with time. In 1 to 4 years after trauma, the rates of traumatic stress reactions remained the same, and 40% of the population had these reactions.
Experts say a person's trauma response can depend on various factors, such as previous psychiatric issues, level of education, loss of loved ones, property, and resources. Another factor that experts point to is the victim's degree of exposure to the quake and the level of threat perception, meaning whether the victim thought their life was going to end during the disaster. Research shows that victims are 5 to 8 times more likely to experience severe PTSD if the threat perception is extreme. People diagnosed with PTSD can relive the traumatic event through nightmares and flashbacks, may have difficulties sleeping and concentrating, and may feel distressed when reminded of the traumatic event. Mental health workers say that physical and emotional changes like self-destructive behavior, feelings of guilt, shame, or anger, and trouble concentrating or sleeping should be watched. In the aftermath of an earthquake, some groups require more assistance in recovering. Among them, children are the most sensitive, as trauma during formative years tends to have the most impact. Experts say children may be signaling things that affect them through body language, and advise caretakers to look out for nonverbal clues like bedwetting, communication issues, crying, and acting out. Dr. Rania Awad, an associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University, suggests listening to them closely.
It's really important to first try to see where they're coming from. What do they already know? What are they saying? This kind of thing really requires that we take our time to be able to have these conversations and not put our own adult level fears and project them onto the children, but rather to listen and see what do they already know.
Rescue groups are also at risk of developing mental illness, although at a lower rate. A study on post-traumatic stress among health workers after the 6.5 magnitude Malatya Elazığ quake in 2020 found that 1/4 of workers had severe trauma in the early stages following the incident. Experts advise working in intervals instead of long stretches and leaving the disaster area when possible. But they also note the psychological rewards associated with successfully helping to rescue people. So, what steps can one take to alleviate trauma? To begin with, experts recommend looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, especially at the physiological level. That would mean acquiring food, water, warmth, and rest as a baseline, but on a mental level, they advocate psychological first aid, a technique that enforces a feeling of safety. According to the World Health Organization, this includes having access to social, physical, and emotional support and being willing to help themselves and their communities. Psychological first aid is a skill that can be learned and applied by anyone and can be accessed through free online courses. But experts warn that recovery is contingent upon a phenomenon known as disruption distress, meaning how long after an earthquake does the incident continue to impact and disrupt lives? Does the victim have a home to go back to? Do they still have a place of work? Are they suffering from the loss of a loved one? Ongoing aftershocks and psychological distress can further hinder the victim's capacity to work and live normally. At the same time, mental health experts say most victims are resilient and are likely to grow from such incidents. They suggest avoiding diagnosing mental illnesses in victims until physiological needs have been addressed. Turkiye's Disaster and Emergency Management Presidency has sent 4 mobile social service centers to Kahramanmaraş, Hatay, Osmaniye, and Malatya. Psychosocial support has been provided to more than 638,000 people, both within and beyond the quake zone. Turkish police and the Turkish army, in coordination with Turkiye's Ministry of National Education, have set up a children's playground in Adıyaman, where children receive psychosocial support. The Turkish Red Crescent has deployed a team administering psychological first aid to the disaster zone, providing services like therapy for adults and children.
Burada ailelerimize psikososyal destek vermeye çalışıyoruz. Hep birlikte yara aldık, hep birlikte yaralarımızı sarmaya çalışıyoruz. Hep birlikte güçlenip ayağa kalkacağımıza inanıyoruz.